tonight's program. I always heard of Byron Herbert Reece, but I didn't know much about Byron Herbert Reece. And once upon a time at the fairgrounds, the state drama came there. It was called The Reach of Song, and everybody raved about it. So I went to The Reach of Song. And somewhere in there was a character named Larry who said, the most important thing is to know where you came from. If you don't know where you came from, it's going to be twice as hard to get to where you're going. I remembered that. I've always remembered that. And so with family history and all that stuff, that's a perfect quote. And so then they started the Byron Herbert Reece Society, and I joined that and have been involved in that. We have several members present tonight from the Byron Herbert Reece Society. If you are a member, would you like to raise your hand? Okay, yeah, there we go. And so Union County claims him, but we've got just as much claim to him as they do. Justin, am I getting on something you're going to say?
I'm talking, Jerry Taylor. Keep on talking.
All right. Okay, so we can claim him just as much as they can because his grandparents lived on Thomastown on the Crow Gap Road. They were Lances, Frances Lafayette Lance and Miss Frances Lafayette Lance. I forgot her name. And so they lived there from the 19-teens through the. She died in the 20s, and he lived here through the 30s. I'm sure that Byron Herbert Reece is his grandparents. And besides, they had a daughter that was a teacher at Young Harris Academy. Young Harris had the primary school, the academy, and the college back then. And so their daughter, I forgot her name, was a teacher at Young Harris Academy. And so then in his later years, he came to teach at Young Harris. And he died at Young Harris, and he's buried at Young Harris. We've got as much claim to him. I thought Byron Herbert Reece, that would be a good program. And so I found the best person to give a program about Byron Herbert Reece, Justin Shook. He knows more about him practically than anybody I know. I first met Justin Shook in the last century. Back in the 1900s. He and his brothers were a part of a local history class that I had and were very instrumental in reenacting on film the murder trial of Tillman Justice. The hanging trial of Tillman Justice for the murder of James B. Goddard. And so Stage is here. He was in it too. And John, who's not here. But glad to have y'all. And so Justin was a stellar student. He graduated at Towns County High School, Young Harris College, and Berry College. He got his master's degree at Liberty University. His teaching career, he started at Towns County Middle School, then to Rabun County Middle School, then to Rabun County High School, and today he's in the Rabun County High School English Department and teaches American government and civics there, as well as French. He's married to Ann Stavenart, who came to Young Harris back in the 1900s. On a Georgia Rotary International Scholarship. I played for their wedding. They have 3 children, Jaden, Kristen, and Jax. And in 2006, Justin became part of the Reece in Schools network of classroom teachers to help promote Reece's poetry. In 2007, he presented on Reece at the Georgia Council of Teachers of English annual conference. And in 2010, he played the role of Reece in the Reece documentary film Voices. And in May of this year, he spoke at the annual meeting of the Reece Society and last Saturday at the 105th Reece birthday celebration. Justin, one of my favorite Reece poems. It's in your little booklet. I made a little booklet for all of you. Justin sent me some poems. And on page 13, it may not be particularly inspirational, but it's always struck us responses poured to me, always. So just read with me, Bitter Berry, on page 13. The voice of the water crying on a stone said to Helmer's daughter sitting alone, death itself is mellow when the age has ripened one, but death's a bitter berry in the morning of the sun. And so to Helmer's daughter, the youngest one of all, the green untimely berry was as bitter as gall. Think about that when a young person dies. It's a bitter berry. All right, Justin.
Thank you, Jerry Taylor. Now, if I call him Mr. Taylor from time to time, it's because it's hard for me to say Jerry. I say Mr. Taylor. Some of you don't want to listen to me because I showed up 10 minutes late. I used to work for a superintendent who said if you're on time, you're late. And if there's anything I learned from my dad, mom and dad, but particularly dad, you show up on time and be where you're supposed to be. And you called me a stellar student. My first teacher was my brother Stacy. He came home from kindergarten. He was 2 years older than I, well, a year and a half older, but 2 grades ahead of me. But he would come home from kindergarten and teach me what he learned that day. So he was my first teacher. Maybe he's the one who should be up here. Also, most of what I'm going to say is because of Dr. John Kay sitting back here, so just keep that in mind. There are people, as you know, that are in the background that allow me to get up here and do the talking. Hey, I was going to hold this as my ace card up the sleeve, but I'll go ahead and use it now. Would you take some pressure off of me for being late if I tell you today's my birthday? And I could be home with my wife and kids eating cake and ice cream, but I'm here with you, and it's because of when Jerry Taylor calls, you show up. I'm going to make a donation to the Reece Scholarship, the Dr. and Mrs. K. Reece Scholarship in honor of Jerry Taylor, and I'll deliver that check tonight in honor of Jerry Taylor for the Reece Scholarship that helps local students, okay? We're going to start with Mountain Fiddler on page 7 of your handout. And I'll go ahead and start reciting, if you don't mind, as you're turning there. Page 7, Byron Herbert Reece. I took my fiddle that sings and cries to a hill in the middle of paradise. I sat at the base of a golden stone in that holy place to play alone. I tuned the strings and began to play, and a crowd of wings were bent my way. A voice said amid the stir, we that were dead, O fiddler, with purest gold are robed and shod, and we behold the face of God. Our halls can show no thing so rude as your horsehair bow or your fiddle wood, and yet can they so well entrance. If you but play, then we must dance. The title of my talk is Byron Herbert Reece, North Georgia's almost forgotten, treasured poet. If you're traveling south from Blairsville on the U.S. Highway 129, as you near Vogel State Park, you'll see on the right side of the highway a state historical marker at the entrance of the Byron Herbert Reece Farm and Heritage Center. Who was this Byron Herbert Reece? Who's my person to say slide here? Okay. Born on September 14, 1917, he is Georgia's Appalachian poet and novelist. You know that, as officially recognized by the state legislature. Can you hear me okay? The Byron Herbert Reece Society, just this past Saturday, Mr. Taylor mentioned this, celebrated Reece's 105th birthday. Reece was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize in Literature. He was twice recipient of the prestigious Guggenheim Award, multiple times recipient of the Georgia Writers Association Literary Achievement Award. And go ahead and go to the next slide right there. In the mid-1940s, his work caught the attention of renowned, go to the next slide, that's the birthday cake. Here he is presenting his Literary Achievement Award, one of them to the president of Young Harris College, Dr. Charles Clegg, and to the librarian there, Mrs. Toller. His work in 1940s caught the attention of renowned Kentucky poet Jesse Stewart, who helped put bring Reece to the attention of publisher E.P. Dutton. Between 1945 and 1958, Reece published 4 books of poetry. We have those over here on the table for you to look at, and 2 novels. His work, thank you, Jeremy, and I'll follow up with you later. Thank you.
Oh,
His work was championed in the Atlanta area press by Ralph McGill, longtime editor of the Atlanta Constitution, who befriended Reece. Let's go to the next picture right there. But Reece was unique. Everyone say unique. Among the American poets who were being published in the 40s and 50s, considered out of step with the writers of his time, his finely crafted ballads were akin to the English poetry of a couple of centuries before, and his lyrical writing had the structured rhythms of the King James Bible that he had read as a boy in his mountain home. It's understood that he read most of the Bible before age 6, and that he had read John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress by that age as well. If you're familiar with literature, you know that would take some time to work through that piece of fiction, prose, allegory by Bunyan. Also, it's interesting to learn about people by talking to those who knew him and spoke with him. And this story comes from Jim Mitchell, who studied with Reece there at Young Harris College. He said that one time he heard Reece say to someone else, I'm the best balladeer in America. And Jim looked at me and said, at the time, that sounded braggadocious. You wouldn't expect that from Byron Herbert Reece, an otherwise modest man. But then Reece looked with a twinkle in his eye at that other person and said that I'm about the only balladeer that's writing ballads in the United States. He was considered out of step because his writing was out of touch with his modern contemporaries, such as the beat poets whose free verse and rhythms were so very unstructured. Reece never achieved the nationwide fame of someone like Robert Frost in the 1900s or of someone like Emily Dickinson in the 1800s, though Reece's work has been described as of equal quality to both of these American greats. You might have heard of, or better yet, seen the Reach of Song. This was mentioned a moment ago by Mr. Taylor. Georgia's official state drama, which was in production at Young Harris College in the 1990s and also for a few years at the Music Hall at the Georgia Mountain Fairgrounds. That play, written by Tom DeTitta, is about the life and work of Reece. So in my talk tonight, I'd like to share with you 3 thoughts about North Georgia's almost forgotten treasured poet. Let's start by looking at the history of the Reece Society and the Farm and Heritage Center there on Highway 129. Then we'll give a brief biography of Reece. And then we'll finish up by suggesting some ways that we, this generation, might continue and share the legacy of this great mountain poet with the next generation. Here's the ballad that first caught Jesse Stewart's attention and helped put Reece on the broader literary map. This is not in your packet because it has a murder in it. I didn't want Jerry Taylor to print this one. Jesse Stewart said that Reece's lyrical poetry was good and his ballads, however, were unsurpassed. This one's entitled, Bless the Lonesome Bird. Mother, lay the fire again and put the kettle on the stove. The hills are curtained by the rain and I have lost my love. Son, the fire leaps in the grate, the kettle whistles through its spout, and supper on the board will wait until your story's out. Well, Mother, yesterday I saw my loved one walking in the hills, twining roses in her hair and picking daffodils. And there was nothing strange in that. Had she no word to say to you that you go like an angry cat the whole day through? No, Mother, ere the hills became green with the young leaf, I was lost by looking on a colder flame that burns at the heart of frost. And yesterday I saw my love with another lover in the wood, and who but I should walk with her in the green solitude? I could not bear to see her bend her lips to another's wooing, and it was never friend and friend that kissed as they were doing. Stranger things were done, my son, nothing may come of it at last. So let your head see what is done, the heart runs too fast. The heart too fast, and the feet too fast, and the hands too fast to slaughter. Someone seeks in the woods so vast tonight for a lost daughter. And Mother, lest the lonesome bird haunt me from the willow, I made her a prayer that no one heard, and gave her a stone for a pillow. Mother, listen to the rain that slashes ever harder. Her handsome lover I have slain, and left him there to guard her. Mother, listen to the night that howls about the eaves. I hid them well and out of sight with many little leaves. Mother, hush and tend the fire, and lay the bed with a clean cover. I sleep tonight with a new desire, with a dread and faithful lover. A dread and faithful lover. Could the speaker in this poem be hinting towards his own imminent date with death? It has been duly noted that the 4 primary themes of Reece's poetry are in fact nature, love, religion, and death. You'll often see these large coffee table books that pair beautiful photography with thoughtful poetry. You know what I'm talking about. Lifelong friend of Reece and founding member of the Reece Society, Mildred Greer, has said that Reece put an entire landscape into his 4 books of poetry: Ballad of the Bones, Bow Down in Jericho, A Song of Joy, and The Season of Flesh, and his 2 novels, Better a Dinner of Herbs and The Hawk and the Sun. An entire landscape. Where are we on there? Let's go to another picture. Okay, let's pause right there. Let's take a look now at the history of the Reece Society. In 1996, Dr. Betty Sellers, longtime English professor at Young Harris College, retired from her professorship. You might have heard of Dr. Sellers. Who knows Dr. Betty Sellers? Okay, well, I'm talking to a friendly crowd. He told me you didn't know much about Reece. Is that right? Am I preaching to the choir, as they say up here? Is this interesting so far?
Yes.
Yeah.
She was Georgia's Poet Laureate in the late 1990s. At YHC, she had been responsible for writing a biography of Reece and bringing about the production of a Reece documentary film. Next slide, I think. Both of these entitled The Bitter Berry. Subtitle here, The Life of Byron Herbert Reece, poet, writer, farmer, teacher. It's my understanding that she also coordinated the annual lecture series at the college. Is that right, Dr. K? Betty Sellers, Reece Lecture Series? But with Dr. Sellers' retirement and with the gradual passing of that generation who might have known Reece firsthand, the notoriety of this great poet, even in this, his home area of North Georgia, was at risk of, as they say, going by the wayside. Remember, he never got the nationwide notoriety as that of Frost or of Dickinson. So in 2003, in steps Dr. John Kay, longtime YHC professor, and I'm going to call him coordinator of special projects extraordinaire. In that year, 2003, Dr. Kay led in the organization of the Byron Herbert Reece Society. Let's go to another slide. This is Dr. and Mrs. Patty Kay, and right there, and with the express purpose of perpetuating the poetry of this possibly greatest of North Georgia's literary figures. Then around 2010, with the generosity of Union County taxpayers and guidance from Commissioner Paris and the help of wise people like Jerry Taylor, who, as you know, serves on the Reece Society Board of Directors, Dr. K brought to life the Reece Farm and Heritage Center that I mentioned earlier, located alongside Highway 129 South. A new documentary film entitled Voices, Finding Byron Herbert Reece, you'll have a picture of that next, was also produced at that time, 2010. Let's not get too, go back one right there, we go. At the Reece Farm and Heritage Center, the Society has renovated the house where the poet and his parents lived, turning it into a welcome center, which is what you see here. Have you been there?
Yes.
How many of you, please? We can skip this whole part, Jerry Taylor. A large meeting pavilion has been built on the property right there along Wolf Creek, and plenty of parking spaces there to accommodate hundreds of visitors. Let's go on to the next slide. Shaded walking paths, accented with plaques featuring Reece's poetry, meander around the Reece Farm and Heritage Center. You can even peek inside the small shed where Reece did much of his thinking and writing. He painted it a purplish red and named it Mulberry Hall. I've got a picture of it here. Let's go on. Here's a look inside the visitor center. You've already been there. Good. Go back again, hopefully. Okay. Here we have people meandering around the poetry walk. Here is, I understand, the typewriter that he did a lot of his writing on. And here's Mulberry Hall. The Reece Farm and Heritage Center connects by a 3/4 mile wooded walking path to Vogel State Park. Have you done that? One person, okay. In fact, the original Reece home place is on the state park land in the 1930s. Let's go to the next slide. When Wolf Creek was dammed up by the Civilian Conservation Corps to build Vogel State Park's Lake Trilita, I think I got that name right on the lake. Go back one. The Reece family had to relocate. Here's a picture of Reece relaxing at Vogel State Park. So as you can see, John Kay, Jerry Taylor, Lamar Paris, and many others have done a good job with the opening of the Reece Farm and Heritage Center. They've done their part to make sure that North Georgia's treasured poet is not forgotten. If you haven't visited the Farm and Heritage Center, you should do so, but most of you have been there. Let's go now to, and please go back, let's go now to page 11. We could wish them a longer stay. Can you read your poems in the audience out there? Plum, peach, apple, and pear, and the harvest tree on the hill unfolds blossom and leaf. From them comes scented air as the brotherly petals spill. Their tenure is bright and brief. We could wish them a longer stay. We could wish them a charmed bough on a hill untouched by the flow of consuming time. But they are lovelier, dearer now, because they are soon to go. Plum, peach, apple, and pear, and the service tree, whiter, blooms whiter than snow. Now for a brief biography. Let's go to the next slide. Show of hands again. You have read the poetry, you've read the biography of Reece. I don't want to tell you something you already know. Okay. So who was this man, Byron Herbert Reece? Born and brought up in that narrow valley along Wolf Creek, the Union County land district known as Choistoy, Cherokee word for land of the dancing rabbits. Isn't that beautiful? Choistoy. Interestingly, when during Reece's day, Highway 129 South was being re-engineered, widened, and paved all the way up to the gap leading across the mountain and into Lumpkin County, isn't it? And the new name given to the gap was to be that of the engineer who was designing or engineering that newly paved road, Neal's Gap. Reece was very vocal in his disapproval of this renaming. Why rename the gap for some highway engineer, probably from Gainesville or Atlanta, who had never even lived there, when it had a perfectly good name in Wallacea, Cherokee, for the Great Frog, or Frogtown Gap? In the 1930s and 40s, when the Great Depression and World War II were raging, Reece and his parents and siblings farmed corn and other crops along that Wolf Creek near Frogtown Gap. It was subsistence farming, or as Zell Miller, author of several local history and mountain culture books, has said, it was hand-to-mouth farming. It was make do or do without. Let's go to another slide. Reece tried to sign up for the Army during the 1940s, but was denied enlistment due to medical reasons. He was too skinny, and he had a family history of tuberculosis. Some of his poetry deals with the tremendous heartache and loss during that time in American history. Reece thought about and wrote about those mountain friends who did go to Europe and who did go to the Pacific, many of whom did not come home. Let's turn over to page 8. Oh, where is Charlie Langford gone? Oh, where is Charlie Langford gone, that he comes not at set of sun for friendly visits at my door, as was his wont to do before? Page 8. He heard the martial bugle blown, and Charlie Langford's gone to war. Then tell me, how does Charlie fare, now that he breathes a foreign air and talks with foreign ale for cheer with words that I no longer hear? He fares as well as any there. He takes his ease. He has no fear. What? When the dreadful cannonade begins, is Charlie not afraid? And when the bombs are bursting close, is Charlie not afraid of those? His teeth would chatter when he prayed, no more than other men's, God knows. When dreary night displaces day, are Charlie's weapons laid away? And sick and sore in every limb, does he lie down to dream of them? To dream, who knows? To sleep, oh aye, and hell could not awaken him. The hell of war, a world war far away from Reece's mountain home, but a hellish war that Reece nonetheless felt and wrote about sincerely. Throughout his short 40 years, Reece would struggle with his own personal hell of depressed frustration and failing health. More about that in a moment. At various times in the 1950s, to help his farming family make ends meet, Reece accepted some teaching and lecturing positions at Young Harris College, at Emory University, at the University of Georgia. In fact, the YHC and the UGA libraries hold many of his letters and notes and unpublished poems in their special collections division. And Reece even took a lecturing job at UCLA way out west. Hold on that slide right there, please. But the payoff for these teaching positions barely covered his travel costs. What's more, Reece's parents had contracted tuberculosis. His mother later would die of it. And so he felt the weighty obligation of staying close to home because he wanted to and because he had to care for his sick parents, to tend to the farm, to make ends meet. Once while away from home, he wrote, I know a valley green with corn, page 6. Are you all still with me?
Yeah.
I know a valley green with corn, where Notley's waters roil and run from the deep hills where first at morn it takes the color of the sun, page 6, and bears it burning through the shade of birch and willow till its tide pours like a pulse and never stayed, dark where the gulf's edge reaches wide. There, while the twilight spins its dream of light and shadow both, the whir of bats and cry of doves will seem a very liveness of the air, About the house the ivy split creeps slowly up to hide the eaves and wreathe the chimney, dark with soot, into a colonnade of leaves. And one will loiter in the yard, soft shadowed by the last of day, as if she waited for a word from lips 3,000 miles away that yearn to speak against her hair, but dumb behind the palm of space taught them to trembling. While there darkness obliterates her face. 3,000 miles from home, I know a valley green with corn. While caretaking for his parents, Reece himself contracted tuberculosis. For years, he struggled with both the physical and the psychological weight of his haunting disease. And so in the spring of 1958, at age 40, he was very sick with tuberculosis. He was frustrated with his own lack of poetic creativity in that late, emotionally wintry season of his life. And according to many accounts, he had been suffering from a hellish depression. The night of his death, he was spoken to by some on the YHC campus. They said he had alcohol on his breath. Later, when they found him, his favorite classical music, a Mozart piece, was playing on the phonograph. His last set of student papers were graded and neatly stacked in his desk drawer. One gunshot had pierced his diseased lung. Reece had taken his own life in his faculty apartment room of that YHC residence hall, a building that no longer stands on campus. It was the same apartment room where his beloved Professor William Lufkin-Dance had taken his own life some 12 years earlier. When Reece had been a student at YHC in the 1930s, Professor Dance had encouraged his writing through the Quill Club, a literary group for the college students. Let's go one more slide up here. Let's pause right there just a moment. Let's go to page 9 in your packet, please. This is called the Stay at Home. The Stay at Home. The fields of Hewley held him, the land where he was born, with fence to mend and cows to tend and care of wheat and corn. He had no leave to wander beyond his place of birth, but often he would ponder the luring lands of earth. He loved the fields of Hewley and every hill that stood to bind him in with other men like him in bone and blood, who often thought of going but had the will to stay and turned them to their hoeing when cocks grew up the day. And yet, as the gypsy-hearted hearken when distance sings, the sounds he most regarded were all of passing things, swift waters flowing, winds to westward blowing, footsteps outward going, and wild wandering wings. In the spring of 1958, Reece had gone. His life story is one of family and of farming. It's a story of the simplicity of working hard to make the ends meet, to meet the demands of survival. It's a story of true literary genius, a story of sickness and sadness and tragedy. From his day of birth to his day of death, Reece's time here was just 40 years. He never married, so there are no children. He is survived by several relatives from the Union County area, including nephew Terry Bob Reece and grandnephew Stephen Reece, both of whom are helping to carry on the memory of Reece's work. Interestingly, this man, North Georgia's treasured mountain poet, always said he was a farmer first and a writer second. Can I tell you a fun fact about Reece? This story comes from, again, Jim Mitchell, Methodist minister who was a student in Reece's classroom at Young Harris College. Said that one day somebody walked up to Byron Herbert Reece and said, "So you're not married?" "No, not married." "Well, do you have a fiancée?" "No." But Reece said, "I hope to meet her someday, and I hope to meet her before long. I don't want to be like George Washington and wait until I can only be the father of my nation." Don't want to wait so long that I can only be the father of my nation. So this man had a good sense of humor. You know these mountain people, they sometimes they'll catch you when you're not expecting it with their humor. Whose eye is on the sparrow, page 12 in your packet. I saw a fallen sparrow dead upon the grass and mused to see how narrow the wing that bore it was. By what unlucky chance the bird had come to settle lopsided near the fence in swordgrass and nettle, I had no means to know. But this I minded well, whose eye was on the sparrow, shifted, and it fell. In the third part of my talk, how then do we engage the next generation with this thoughtful poetry of Reece? Can I get a show of hands? Is there anyone under age 40 in the room? Anyone under age 40? One person? Now, I don't ask you that to necessarily to make you laugh, but I'm glad you laughed. You don't mind that we laugh, do you? Well, it was the same situation back in May at the annual meeting of the Reece Society. I posed that question. I looked over the audience. How many of you are under age 40? There was one hand. So the Reece Society is considering a question: how do we carry on this work of Reece? By the way, Dr. K, this was mentioned in the bio that Jerry Taylor read, organized a Reece into Schools network of teachers, and we did this 15, 17 years ago. So he's had this work in mind for going on 20 years now. How will I translate Reece to my own kids? Jaden, age 10, Kirsten, age 9, and Jax, age 7. Well, for example, Kirsten loves to be outside with nature, looking for spring lizards and lightning bugs and toad frogs and crawdaddies in the creek. I will transmit Reece to her by focusing on his heightened awareness of living things. How many of you, I know you've done this, you cut the apple in a cross section and you see the star in the center of the apple? Yep. Lots of head nods. You know what I'm talking about. Go to page 5. And have you ever thought about it this way? Page 5, gathers again to shining. I am that creature born to eat the dust, the alchemist of bowl and leaf transmutes. I had to look up that word bowl. Anybody know what a bowl is? It's the trunk of a tree. All right? I am that creature born to eat the dust, the alchemist of bowl and leaf transmute from solvent soil in which the root is thrust into the gold and wonder-shapen fruit. When windy trumpets signal winter weather, impelled by such a need as prompts the squirrel to hoard the hickory nut, I go and gather a dusty harvest into bin and barrel. Yet, everybody say yet. Yes. Yet I am he who feasts upon a star. I taste the sun when eating of the fruit shaped in the image of that globe afar, from whence the leaves brought down their heavenly loot of light, that, once unlocked from apple and grain, gathers again to shining in my brain. Wow. You'll think about the apple differently next time you eat one. My son Jaden, age 10, he is good about seeing the unexpected perspective in life's otherwise common everyday moments. He loves animals, cats, dogs, horses, and he loves protecting animals that have been injured by automobiles. He is able to get a more thoughtful perspective on those common everyday moments. Take a look at page 3 in your packet. Boy and deer. Over the white, the frozen ground, with cautious step, the deer came down. The boy who had come to be alone with cloud and rock and tree suddenly saw the deer and hid to see what that proud creature did. But the sharp snapping of a limb made the proud deer aware of him. Kindred too, each watcher stood with perfect stillness in the wood, each seeing each with mild surprise, and each with wonder in his eyes. You'd be hard-pressed to find another poet who could say it like that. And as for my third child, Jax, age 7, he likes to run and romp. He likes to turn cartwheels. My wife counted 12 cartwheels he turned on the soccer field while he was waiting for somebody to kick him the soccer ball last soccer season. He's always needing movement, and his mind is always moving. He asks questions like, Daddy, was God born? When was God born? What happened to all those animals that didn't get onto the ark? Jack says his favorite person in the world is God. So I'm going to tell Jax about Reece's recognition of and reverence for the creation and its creator. My kids are beginning to understand there's a difference between the temporal and the eternal. They're beginning to understand that life here is transitory, and Reece helps us think about this passing of time, about the topics of continuity and change, about questions such as, what if we could live on this earth forever? And all those other interesting, perplexing questions about time and eternity, about the creation and its creator. Page 4 in your packet. Feathers and fur. I saw in a house abandoned by men a timid gray mouse and a speckled wren. The wren below her nest on the stair nodded as though she were mistress there, and the mouse, for all he was timid and poor, seemed glad he could call the floor his floor. The owners were roaming or moved away or waiting the coming of the judgment day. How widely scattered, for why, or where, little mattered to feathers and fur. Wow. A few years ago when I turned 40, today it's 45, I got a renewed perspective on life. For the first 40 years I had been looking forward, always looking forward to finishing college, finding a job that fit my calling, getting married, starting a family, and you know how life goes for a maturing adult. Always looking forward. But at age 40, I began to look back, to look behind me, to think about what I had accomplished and what I hadn't accomplished, and what I would leave behind. To think about what's most important in life. Think about what need not be forgotten in the handing down of my life's work to my kids, and someday, God willing, my grandkids. I got so caught up in all this thinking about turning 40, I counted up all the graduate hours that I had that did not add up to another degree. And it seemed to me it added up to enough hours to make a doctorate, and I awarded myself a doctorate. I went ahead and made the diploma. It's signed by the president, the chairman of the board, S.J. Shook. And it's hanging on the wall in the room downstairs that my wife doesn't go into very often, where all those books are. And she says, why don't you read those books? You keep buying books, why don't you read them? And it's hanging on the wall. She said to me, what are you doing? What are you doing making this diploma? I said, I've got to show something for all that I've done. For North Georgia, Reece and his poetry is one of our area treasures that we must pass on, carry forth, and hand down to the next generation. His life and literary work need not be forgotten. We must ensure that our kids and grandkids, the next generation, that they will, just as we have, come to understand and appreciate this treasured North Georgia poet we call Byron Herbert Reece. The page that has the 3 epigraphs, page 10. Let's take a look at some of the other slides. I've talked and I forgot to ask you to move forward here. Here's a look at Reece as farmer first. Always said he was a farmer first and a writer, poet second. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, that's the poem we read. The others again shining, boy and deer, feathers and fur. Okay, let's pause right here just for a moment. From chips and shards in idle times, I made these stories, shaped these rhymes. May they engage some friendly tongue when I am past the reach of song. Go to the next picture before we read the next epigraph here. For better, a dinner of herbs. So this was the epigraph that he had written for his publication of his book, Better, a Dinner of Herbs, which is a novel. Better, a Dinner of Herbs, excuse me. I was of greater stature than at finish when this work began. Each reader, as he sloughs the gloss to read beneath, will meet my loss. And may he out of charity and add my cubits back to me. Some of these you have to think about, don't you? Let's go to another picture, please. Read that. Let's go to another picture. And one more. Okay, let's finish with this. For the Ballad of the Bones. One more poem. Being a pedagogue confined within four walls, to ease my mind far from Dooley's dells and stones, I visited the place of bones. And as they knit to life, I saw, and of that wonder wrote with awe, referring to Ezekiel in the Valley of Dry Bones, right? When I have learned what death may teach, and my bones, stricken each from each, lie in some hole or hollow dim, may some Ezekiel speak to them, and they rise up from ruin rife, leaping to everlasting life. Thank you for listening. God bless you and your family. Thank you.